Good to see this number out. Obviously, we are going to be a little short this morning. It's a weekend before Christmas, so a lot of people traveling. So we'll be, Lord willing, finishing up Lesson 9 this morning and getting into Lesson 10. And probably what I'm going to do, even though I am the teacher next quarter, so we're just going to keep rolling along, I'm going to try to catch up. Emphasis on try. So next week we'll probably have a couple of lessons, and I'll just try to limit the number of questions for both Lesson 11 and Lesson 12. Because if I remember correctly, I think next Sunday is technically our last Sunday of the quarter before we move into the period of the United Kingdom. So speaking of the time period of the United Kingdom, we're currently in the time period of the Judges still, and so let's just run through our 17 time periods again real quick before we pick back up with Lesson 9. So we've got before the flood, the scattering of the people, the patriarchs, the Exodus, wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest, the Judges, the United Kingdom, the divided kingdom, Judah alone, captivity, return from captivity, years of silence, the life of Christ, the early church, and the letters to the Christians. All right, so we are again in Lesson 9, talking primarily about Samson, and we've answered the first two, so we're going to be picking up with question number 3. How faithful was Samson to his Nazirite vow? Explain. So, just speaking of the Nazirite vow, what were kind of the 3 specific things that a person was to avoid, or the 3 specific things that were required of someone that took the Nazirite vow? Miss Penny?
The ABCs, no alcohol, no barber, no corpse.
The ABC. So I should have went to Bible class with Miss Penny when I was a kid, because that's the first time I've ever heard that. But that is a very good way to remember that. So no alcohol, no barber, and no corpse. So as far as the alcohol, it was I'm pretty sure you couldn't even touch a grape. And so you had that. Obviously, they were going to let their hair grow. This is obviously one of the things we know very famously about Samson, and then the not touching of corpses. So, with those 3 in mind, how well or how faithful was Samson to his Nazirite vow? Ken?
Well, we know that he was persuaded to tell his secret of his strength to Delilah, his wife, after she hounded him to tell her. And once he did that, of course, then she cut his hair, or had his hair cut at least, and then he was defeated by the Philistines.
Okay, so we know that Delilah was a constant dripping, and he would have been better to have been in the corner of his roof than to listen to that, but he did. He had his hair cut, so we know that one. Lena?
Well, I think the seriousness of his attitude is more demonstrated with the lion. If he's not supposed to touch anything dead, and he doesn't see anything bad about coming to the corpse of a lion and drawing the honey from it, he's not following that.
Okay, so we see that with his breaking it in that way with the lion and the corpse. What other way do you see that I think that it's pretty obvious that he would have touched a corpse. Okay. So just sticking with the idea of the touching of the corpse, though, what other things do we see in Samson's life? Francis?
He had to supply the linens that he had to get from 30 people he killed.
Yeah, so they didn't figure out the riddle. They were told the riddle because Samson was betrayed in that too, and so he's going to fulfill his part of the deal, and he's going to get him 30 sets of clothes, and in order to do that, he's going to go kill the Philistines and take their clothes and give it to them. And so obviously if he's going to do that, he's touching a corpse. I would contend if you're killing 1,000 Philistines with a jawbone, there's probably some corpse touching in that situation too. But then Norm brought up, I think he said he liked to party, I think is the way that he worded it. So obviously, he's messed up the B. He's messed up the C. Did he mess up the A? What was that, Lena?
I did not see any mess up of the grape touching.
Other thoughts? Norm's not back there, so I can't ask him what he was thinking when he said that. Oh, he is back there. Tell us what you were thinking, Norm.
Just the environment which he hung around, and I agree with Lena. I don't see anything directly associated with that, but the environment and friends and things that he did would have put him. If he walked into the bar and didn't touch any alcohol, that's altogether possible. But certainly his influence in being in those situations was all wrong. And I kind of liken it to the idea where, if you're thinking it, you're doing it.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a good analogy. He was hanging out in the bars. Are we told that he was partaking? No, we're not. But we know that when they came to Timnah, he went to the vineyards. So there's grapes all over the place. In verse 10, when he arrives at the wedding feast, well, what took place at a wedding feast? So we don't know. But because we do know his lack of self-control that he displayed throughout his life, it's possible, but we don't know. But he obviously did not take it nearly as seriously as he should have. Question number 4, how might the story of Samson, in particular Judges 14 and 16, be relevant in today's context about who we choose to have relationships with and especially who we choose to marry? And then the last thing I asked there is, where is God's focus? So how does the story here of Samson and kind of the relationships that he had really help us and teach us about our own relationships and who we choose to hang around and especially who we choose to marry? And remember, we got Sam and Maddie sitting in the class together. So, Miss Shirley?
Well, he let Delilah lead him into all sorts of things that he shouldn't have, so.
Okay. So,
Maybe someone that's not a Christian, they can lead us away.
okay. So if you obviously are in a relationship with someone, especially if you are married to someone that does not have the same values maybe as you do, obviously we can be just as influenced as Samson was. Francis?
I said, he saw and he wanted, and his desire were, well, just because he wanted her, the first wife, and then the harlot at Gaza, and then Delilah. And he focused on the physical part of his life, and God focuses on the heart.
Okay. So obviously he saw something that delighted him as far as the outward appearance, and that's what he wanted. And I have said this, I know multiple times, and I've even said it from the pulpit, the thing that typically is going to first attract us to someone is what? It's the looks. I mean, you're not going to look at someone, and yes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So, but you're not going to look at someone that you don't think is attractive and think, well, I want to actually start a relationship with that person. All right, so that is something that we are initially, we all have eyes. We all have our perception of what is beautiful and what is not. But it can't stop there, okay? Because it's not about the outward beauty, the outward appearance, like Francis is talking about. And we see that in particular because of God's focus, as she was talking about. He looks at the inside. So 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And that is something that is so important for us. And then 1 Peter 3:4, but let it be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. And what's the thing about beauty? It fades. All right. The outward appearance, the beauty of ourselves. As you get older, you start looking like me, and you turn more gray, and you start having wrinkles. And so it's not so much about the outward appearance, but we have to be concerned about our heart. And so Ms. Shirley kind of hit on this. Francis kind of hit on this. And so we've got to make sure that when we are choosing people that we are going to have relationships with, and this could be even just friends, not necessarily our spouse, but we need to do that with the mind of looking at their values and their morals and what do they care about. Do they care about serving God? Do they care about their faith in our Lord? Because if not, then we're going to be negatively impacted, whether or not we want to admit it or not. And so we have to be very, very careful that we don't allow that to happen. And so in any of these relationships, we cannot get into a relationship that is going to lead us away from God, that is going to lead us away from serving Him and ultimately keeping us from going to heaven. And while choosing our friends is important, choosing our spouse is even more important. And outside of choosing to become a Christian, there is no more important decision that we make in our lives next to choosing who we are going to marry. Any other thoughts on number 4? Number 5, how does the theme of sight show itself in the life of Samson? What's
He looked on her beauty, and that's what enticed him, of course.
Okay, so he looked on her beauty, and that was what first enticed him. Norm?
He was nearsighted to the extreme. He could only see what was the next pleasure or the next activity that was almost immediately going on, and could not see past that to the consequences of it.
Okay. Sam?
And when Samson had his functional physical eyesight, he was blind to things which he should be doing in the way that he should go, and he relied on his own strength and not the Lord's. And then at the end of his life, when he was blind, he then saw who he should be relying on, and he used that to the best of his ability.
All right, so I'm not sure if everybody heard Sam, but there is, to me anyways, when I read the story of Samson, there is this symbolism of, in the beginning of his life, it's all about what he sees. He's doing what is right in his own eyes, and I see this woman, go get her for me. And this is the theme that we see. Even though he is physically seeing, he is blind. All right, he's not actually seeing the consequences of his own actions. But then you have the symbolism, like Sam was saying, at the end of his life. And so he is someone that has lived his life in this way. And now, because of that, he ends up in the situation where he is captured by the Philistines, and they gouge his eyes out. He can't see. A man of so much strength is actually having to be led around by a child. And it is in that moment that he finally sees. And he realizes that I have to turn back to God. And so it is, it's just the paradox of sight and blindness, I think, is so prevalent within the story of Samson. And I think that oftentimes it can happen to us as well. We think that we're seeing and we're blind. And sometimes we need to close our eyes so that we can be able to see the truth and recognize that God is our strength, and it is God that we need to rely on. Any other comments on that? Question number 6. In what ways can you see Samson as a type of Christ?
At the end of his life.
Self-sacrifice at the end of his life, okay. Miss Shirley?
Well, he delivered his people when he pulled down the temple. He delivered his people, and Christ delivers us.
Okay, so the deliverer of his people. Sam?
Betrayed and delivered to the hands of his enemies.
He was betrayed for silver. And I think if you go back and look at the amount of silver that Delilah was offered, is an enormous amount. I'm not saying it justifies what she did, obviously, but it was a huge amount. But Samson was betrayed by Delilah for silver. Jesus was obviously betrayed by Judas for 30 pieces of silver. What else? What about the beginning of his life? What was that?
Well, telling about his birth.
Okay, so the announcement by the angel. Ms. Penny, what did you say? That's what you said? Okay. So we've got the announcement from the angel. We have the miraculous birth, just like Jesus. I think that there's some similar language that's used about Samson even early in his life and him being dedicated to the Lord like Jesus. We know that the Spirit of the Lord was with Samson. You know, we talk about a lot of his issues, but we'll talk here in just a moment with the last question about his faith. And we know that the Spirit of the Lord was with Samson, just as it was with Jesus. And one of the other things that I see is the people had not necessarily, at least we don't have a record of them calling out to the Lord for a deliverer, but God had sent them a deliverer, being Samson. Same thing when Jesus came. People weren't crying out saying, you know, send us a Savior, but God obviously sent Jesus to be our Savior. So there's several similarities that I think we can see there. Anything else there with number 6? Question number 7. Samson is a study in the subtle lure of temptation and its snare. Note the consequences of giving in to temptation in the life of Samson. Why might Samson have thought he could have overcome temptation? What are some things that lull us into thinking temptation will not affect us? And what are some steps we can take to avoid temptation or not give in to temptation? Don't you love it when I ask 10 questions in one? You thought there was only 9 questions. There's more like 25. Norm P?
Answer all of this. He was letting his physical capabilities cloud his spiritual sight. Just because he was strong in this one thing, he could handle anything. And that it's effectively arrogance and pride.
Okay.
And sin doesn't work that way. Satan doesn't work that way. He's not going to hit you where you're strong because you can obviously handle it. He will stoke that evil and let you play around in your strength so he can hit you where you're weak.
All right, so there's definitely this sense of arrogance, especially with the situation with Delilah, the mentality that he had of, I'm going to, as at other times, be able to basically just do whatever I want. And so he's leaning on his past successes of, well, I've handled this fine before, so obviously I should be able to handle it fine moving forward as well. And so with that, I think relying on our strength or apparent strength and our past successes, meaning that we've been able to overcome and withstand these temptations in the past, I think that over time we can be desensitized, where we lose sight of how bad sin is, and we keep creeping closer and closer and closer to that because of this overconfidence. And with that, we probably have this slow progression of we've had this boundary, and, well, it's kind of eroded a little bit because of things that have happened in our past and our own arrogance and the fact that we are in control, and so that boundary just starts getting pushed further and further and further away. So what are some things that we can do to avoid, to still avoid temptation and not give in? Ms. Shirley?
Well, you don't go to places where you're tempted.
Okay. So I think that goes back to the boundaries, and you set very clear boundaries, and when you set those boundaries, you don't compromise those boundaries. And I know that this has been said multiple times, that if the line is sin, oftentimes we have the mentality of, well, I'm going to just walk just as close. I'm not over it. When in actuality, we should be turning the opposite direction and getting as far away from temptation as we can. And so, yeah, we need to avoid those situations. And part of that comes by self-awareness. And we all don't have the same weaknesses, but we need to understand what our weaknesses are so that we can more aptly set these boundaries to keep away from those things that are more strongly going to tempt us. What else? Sam?
Don't ever be complacent. Don't ever get too comfortable where you are if you're in a good place spiritually. Don't ever let that be an excuse for you to stop, to not be diligent in whatever you need to do to avoid your temptation. When you think you're strongest is probably when you're weakest.
That's right. So you can't let your guard down. And so, yeah, we think that we have this sight, and the more that we continue to think that and rely on our own strengths is when we become blind even to those temptations. Brother Bill?
The life of Joseph is as positive as an example of this as Samson is a negative example, where he continued to put God first and he resisted any temptation, and and God rewarded him for that time after time in whatever situation he found himself.
Yes.
It's a good lesson for us.
And I think that application to us is we can't even being complacent just about ourselves, but we have to grow. The objective is that we're going to grow in our relationship with God. We're going to strengthen our relationship with God. And whenever we do that, that's going to help us in these situations to avoid those temptations. And I think part of it, too, is we need to learn from, we should learn from our mistakes, but we really should learn from other people's mistakes as well. I had a history teacher in 8th grade, Coach Hale, who's actually the girls' basketball coach, and he had several slogans. I won't say all of them, but I remember him very, very vividly saying that those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And we can't look at the people that are around us and the sins that they've committed and the consequences that they've had to suffer and not learn from those. We can't look at that and be like, well, I'm different than them. I should be able to handle this. No, we have to learn from other people's mistakes, and we have to learn from our mistakes as well. Samson should have learned more from his own mistakes and instead of continually getting himself in the same situations. Anything else with number 7? Ken?
Let's not forget, though, that Samson is listed among the faithful in Hebrews 11. So his life, at least to some degree, must have been pleasing to God. And at the end, where he destroyed the Philistines, I guess was, put him in that list, I guess.
We'll let Ken start off with answer number 9. We'll get there in just a second. Question number 8. What led to Samson's downfall in his relationship with Delilah, and what lessons can we learn from this? Miss Shirley?
Well, he believed her for one thing, and then he thought when she was going through those questions about her, he thought she was playing a game instead of being aware of what she was really doing.
Yeah, I don't think he was very aware, and actually I think Samson was playing a game too. I think he thought it was a game. Dangerous game to be playing. What else? Norm?
Well, just being in that relationship to begin with was the start of it. Had he not been in the relationship to begin with, he wouldn't have put himself in that situation. But like everybody has said already, he's put himself into that kind of a relationship many times in his life. And so, again, the arrogance and pride made him blind to it.
Yeah. Yes, he should have never been in that situation. He shouldn't have put himself in that situation. He shouldn't have been married to Delilah, but he was. And this happens to us too. We make bad mistakes. We make bad choices on who we marry. And we're are now bound to someone that maybe doesn't have the same morals as us. But that does not keep us from the commitments that we have. And so regardless of what situation we find ourselves in, we still have to stay true to our commitments. It's not an excuse to not serve God faithfully because your husband or your wife is not a Christian and does not go to church, and so you can't wake up on Sunday morning and let them persuade you. You have to stay true to your commitments. And part of that is you can't compromise. as we see here. And you have to also be mindful of manipulation, and that's not a pleasant thing to talk about when you're talking about your spouse, but obviously we can take advantage of one another with our spouses, partially because we know how to push their buttons, we know their weaknesses and their strengths, and so we can manipulate them. And so you have to be mindful of that as well. Anything else on number 8? All right, question number 9. How is it that Samson, with his many sins, is listed with greats like Noah and Abraham? So yeah, Ken kind of touched on this just a second ago. And yes, admittedly, I've been pretty hard on Samson. And we've asked multiple questions like this throughout the study of the Judges, because there are multiple judges that are listed here in Hebrews chapter 11, 32 through 34. And me, in my feeble mind, I read through these stories and I'm like, man, these guys are pretty bad. But yet they're listed in what we consider the Hall of Fame of Faith. So how is it that we've talked about all of these things that Samson has had issues with? So how is it that he is listed in this Hall of Fame of Faith? So Ken had mentioned at the end of his life where he had asked God to be with him once more, and he literally brought the house down. What else, Norm?
It gives us a hint on how God looks at us and our lives and our faith. It's not where you start, it's where you end up. And if we keep that in mind, I mean, it's not an excuse to make every mistake in the world that we could possibly make on the way, so that last step I can finally, change my life. But it really is about change in your life and where you end up. That is the most important part.
Okay. What else? What are some things that are specifically mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11 after it lists this group of people and the things that they did that maybe Samson would have done?
He saved his family, and Samson, he saved his fellow people from the Philistines.
Okay, so Sam's talking about, it's mentioned there that they became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Obviously, Samson wasn't an army. He was an army of, I won't call him an army of two, because it was him and God. But there was faith displayed in that. One of his responsibilities, obviously, was to deliver God's people from oppression, as judges were to do. And he was faithful to God in carrying out his purpose in the thousands of Philistines that he killed. So I think that's definitely one. What else? Norm?
Almost all of verse 34 there is all about Samson.
There's a lot there that I think could very easily be related to Samson. The very first thing, shut the mouths of lions. Samson didn't do that on his own. Samson did it through the power and strength of God, and it specifically says in Hebrews 11:34 that that's by faith. So that's something. What else? Subdued kingdoms. All right. So verse 33, it talks about performed acts of righteousness. And one of the things that I think I have looked over in the past is after defeating 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey, what's the situation at that point with Samson? He's just killed 1,000 men. He's got this urge. I mean, most of us are probably pretty tired after we just killed 1,000 men with a jawbone. So he's thirsty. Well, what does he do? He asks God to provide him drink. And admittedly, when I've read this in the past, it's like, man, can't you have a little more respect? But I think that's just my mind reading it. But this is an act of faith. Who's he going to provide him? He's going to God. So this is an act of faith. Talks about being afflicted and ill-treated in verses 36 and 37, mockings, chains, and imprisonment. All of these things are listed in Hebrews chapter 11 as being done by faith, and all of these things can include Samson. So, was Samson some great example of a pure and holy life throughout his entire life? No. But was Samson a man of faith? Yes. And so when we ask the question, how is it that Samson is listed here? You know why? Because God put him there. It don't matter what I think of Samson. God says he's a man of faith. And so we need to recognize that in his life. All right, anything else on lesson? Miss Francis.
Judges 14:4, and this is when he started this process of destroying the Philistines. But his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. For at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel.
Yes, we see that several times with obviously God working through him, the Spirit of the Lord being with him. Anything else on who you pointing at, Norm? Brother Bill.
I was just thinking how Paul looked at the end of his life. He had done some pretty terrible things earlier on, but he said he had fought the good fight, and he was ready to receive his reward.
Yes. Exactly. And like Norm said, it's not about how you start, it's how you finish. We just got to finish. Norm P. and then Melissa.
The events of what caused him to be in that position at the very end would cause a lot of people to just become despairing and despondent. And we can see that at the very end, it did not do that to Samson. He took the opportunity that had been presented to him and turned back to God where he should have been to begin with. And that's kind of a lesson for us. Samson messed up over and over and over again, and every time God was still there. And we can walk our life that way, just keep messing up. God's not going to leave. He's going to stay there. And he's waiting for us to return. And so it is never too late, no matter what awful thing happens to you, to turn back to God and be like, God, all right, bring me back home. I need to go back home. Can I go there now?
Yeah, many people could have had that happen to them, and they've lived this life of this great strength, and they get their eyes gouged out after they've been imprisoned, and they could have just blamed God and could have pouted about it. Instead, Samson was humbled by it, as he should have been, and he turned to God. Melissa?
There's nothing we can do that we can't make right.
Yes. Until the end, we definitely have that opportunity and ability to do that. All right, moving on now to lesson number 10, moving into the book of 1 Samuel, still in the time period of the Judges. And question number 1, what can we learn from Hannah's prayers in 1 Samuel 1 and 2? What changed Hannah's disposition after her prayer in chapter 1? What other prayer in Scripture is a mirror of Hannah's prayer in chapter 2? So what are some things we can learn from Hannah's prayers? Miss Shirley?
Well, she was weeping and she was pouring out her heart to God, and that's what we should do when we pray.
Okay.
And she praised God in the process, and then after the child was born, she said she prayed for this child, and she received the answer to her prayers.
Okay. So she was in a situation of need, and she turned to God, and she turned to God because of her trust, her faith in God. And that's something that we definitely need to do in all situations. We need to have that faith and that trust in God, and understand the power of prayer and the need for personal prayer, just like we see here with Hannah. What else? Why, or what actually changed Hannah's disposition after her prayer there in chapter 1? So she's in this deep distress, and she's promising God that if He grants her a son, that she's going to dedicate him to the Lord's service. And then we see this change in her disposition. She went away and ate. But what moved her from this sadness? At this point, she had not received any kind of a promise. God had not answered her prayer. but yet we see this change in her disposition. Why?
What he said, that go in peace, that her request of God would be fulfilled.
Okay. So there was a conversation there with Eli after Eli says, "You need to get out of here, you're drunk." Mom?
He had faith in God. She prayed to God and talked to him. And that's all she could really do, and that's the way we should be today. We should talk to God and let him take care of it.
Yes. I think Eli probably made her feel better there at the end, but I think her disposition changed because she laid it all on God. And she knows that that's all that she can do, but she does have trust and faith in God, and I think that was what changed her disposition. She is in this deep distress and sadness, and she literally pours her heart out to God. Then it's done. I've done what I can do, and God is faithful, and I trust in God. So I'm going to go away and have a better mindset, and I think that is something that we definitely need to pay attention to, because oftentimes I think that we dwell in our own anxiety and struggles, and we don't lay them at the feet of our God, and we need to. And when we do, we should probably be happier because of our faith in God. Ms. Shirley?
Well, no matter what the situation, you pray to God for what you want, but at the end of that prayer, you also have to say, "Thy will be done."
Yes.
And know that you've done all you can do.
Yeah, and I think that's the mindset of Hannah, because again, she hadn't received anything at this point, but she knows that it's in God's hands, and His will is going to be done. So what do you think, or what other prayer in Scripture you think is a mirror of Hannah's prayer here?
Would be Mary's in Luke chapter 1.
Okay, so the prayer here of Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 2, it really is a song of thanksgiving and celebrating God's holiness and His power and His justice in protecting the weak. And this prayer mirrors very closely Mary's prayer in Luke chapter 1, verses 46 through 55. And you can just kind of look at both of them, and both prayers really express this profound joy and gratitude of God's intervention in their life, acknowledging God's ability to reverse their circumstances. Hannah speaks of God exalting the humble and bringing down the mighty, and Mary echoes this same theme. And they both emphasize God's faithfulness to His promises and His justice in caring for His people. So I just think that's interesting. We talk about similarities of Samson and Jesus, but I think with our prayer here with Hannah, we see great similarities there to Mary's prayer in Luke chapter 1. Question number 2, how can Hannah's story encourage us when others discourage or judge us? What strategies can we implement to maintain our faith in difficult times? So we already mentioned about how Eli is watching her pray, and he's seeing her mouth moving and not hearing anything, and so of course accuses her of being drunk. I mean, that in and of itself is she's being judged by Eli and could be discouraging. But what other situation do we see in her life that would have been discouraging and somebody's judging her? Okay.
Smile on her enemies.
Okay, so Penina is taunting her, and you know that that's not easy to have that happening, and so that, I'm sure, is adding to her distress. And the same thing can happen to us today. We can very easily be discouraged by things that people say, sometimes those that are closest to us, sometimes our spouses, but even sometimes just our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. And so what can we implement to maintain our faith in these difficult times? Norm?
We can do like Daniel did. And that is establish good habits in our relationship with God and the things that we do. And so that way, when times are rough, we've already got the basic foundations already laid in place to be able to weather the storm.
Okay.
If we wait until the storm hits to begin the work, then the storm will take us.
Okay. So making preparations in that and kind of building our faith, strengthening our faith. What's something else that we can do that we've already talked about with Hannah? I think I heard somebody say it. Pray. So we got regular prayer and giving things over to God. I think that is something that definitely can help us overcome these situations. What else? Ms. Francis?
In a sense, if you look at what everybody else has and you desire to have that, then you just need to be content with what you have. But you always go to God in prayer, and if it's His will that you will have what you desire, then you will. But be content with what you have.
Okay. So yeah, there definitely needs to be this level of contentment and not really judging our own selves against someone else and what they may have. Sam?
And this may sound very surface level, but it's also important for you to take responsibility where you can take responsibility. Like even if it's just for your general health, like you need to give yourself what you can to just be in a good state where you can be receptive to good things. And it mentions in verse 18 that when Hannah got up, she went and she ate. And I think of David when his son died. He got up and he went and ate, and I think that's just an interesting detail for both of them. That like it shows there's a routine, there's something that they're doing themselves, and in a way it's like, hey, I got to do what I got to do, and what I can't do, I'll give it to God. And I think having yourself set up in that way is a very healthy way of dealing with this.
Yes, definitely. All right, we're already a minute behind. Norm P., can you ring the bell for us? So we'll pick up with question number 3. And like I said, I'm going to have fewer questions on the next couple of lessons, and we'll see if we can get a little further along next week. Thanks, everybody.